Okay, welcome back to Tea with Jamie. Today's driver profile series is devoted to a Mr. Nicholas Hülkenberg, otherwise known as Nico. He was born on the 19th of August 1987, that makes him 38. He currently drives for Audi, his teammate is Gabriele Bortoleto, we know this. He's driven for a whole bunch of teams, a bunch of them just sort of rebranded, but there's sort of 9 on the list here. Williams, Force India, Sauber, Renault, Racing Point, Aston Martin, Haas, Sauber and Audi. So yeah, some of those are the same team, just with different names. But he's still been around the block, driven for a whole bunch of teams, and has had quite a long career. He's started 260 Grand Prix, he's got 624 points, he's got 1 pole position, 1 very famous podium, and no wins. So let's go back to the start and find out how Nico Hülkenberg got to Formula 1. So he's not a Formula 1 Nepo baby. His parents weren't in motorsport at all. His dad actually ran a freight forwarding and transport business in Emmerich in Western Germany. And Nico actually trained to go into that company and was destined to be a freight forwarding agent, whatever that is. And thanks to a very successful karting career, which began at the age of 9, he was able to focus on single-seater racing and then get into Formula 1 eventually. So he quickly became very successful. He was German junior kart champion in 2002, and then full-blown German kart champion in 2003. And he was always on the larger side, which is partly why his nickname, the Hulk, kind of fits quite well. And, you know, being larger, like taller, is not an advantage in motor racing at all. Another reason why he was given the nickname the Hulk was that he was known to be a little aggressive on track. So, off track, nice chilled out guy. On track, a little more on the aggressive side, shall we say. So progressing out of karts, in 2005 he entered the German Formula BMW series with Joseph Kaufmann Racing, and he won 8 races in that series. And he was actually competing with future F1 driver Sebastian Buemi in the championship. And this was his first major single-seater campaign, and immediately, impressed with those 8 wins. And, it was sort of destined for greater things. So he was there for a while, and then I've got to talk about this A1 series, right? This was they kind of billed it the World Cup of Motorsport, and it was less about teams versus teams, and it was more about, like the World Cup, countries against countries. And it focused mainly on the drivers, and Hülkenberg was in this for the 06-07 season. It ran until 09, so he was there sort of in the middle of it. It ran from 2005 to 2009, so it was sort of alongside all the other series in motorsport. And it drew a huge amount of names, and a lot of future F1 drivers and professional drivers of all kind went through this A1 series when they were at the right age at that time, But anyway, Hülkenberg dominated. He got 9 victories in those 2 seasons and comfortably won the championship for Germany. And this was, he was a relative unknown at this time. And that got him a look in Formula 3. So the following year, he joined F3 in 2007, this is, with the ART team. Again, did super well, won 4 races that season in 2007, and finished 3rd behind future F1 stars, once again, Romain Grosjean, and that Sebastian Buemi guy again. And so he was, again, rookie season and finished 3rd behind 2 established drivers. Super impressive. So he comes back in 2008 and absolutely dominated. Won 7 races, took 6 poles, and became the F3 Euro Series champion that year. So by the age of 21, he was 21 at this time, he was Formula BMW champion, A1 GP champion, F3 champion. He also won the Masters of F3 and was, by this point, so early in his career, had just the most ridiculous CV. So the very next year, in 2009, after 2 years in F3, he moves up to GP2, which is now known as F2, right? GP2 was the equivalent of F2. And stayed with the same team, ART, but this time obviously a rung up. And in 2009, as a rookie, he won both the sprint and the full race at Nürburgring. He won the race in Hungary, Valencia, and the season finale in Portimao. And this secured him the championship before even the Portimao race. He'd won before even the last race. And so as a rookie, he added GP2 winner to his CV. I mean, astonishing, really. I mean, there were only 2 people who'd won GP2 in their rookie season before that, and that was Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton. And so quite the pedigree of champions to join. Nico Hülkenberg had done it. So he may have had the greatest resume and setup for Formula One career at that time of anyone ever to that point. He'd won basically everything he'd entered, right from karting all the way through single-seaters up until the last race at Portimao of the 2009 GP2 season. So it was inevitable. He was heading up to Formula One, and in 2010, Williams grabbed him and put him alongside Rubens Barrichello. Now, Barrichello now in his 18th Formula One season alongside Hülkenberg with his first. You know, the difference in experience was extraordinary. Rubens's debut in Formula One happened when Hülkenberg was only 5. That's how long Rubens Barrichello had been racing. So it was an average season. However, he had one real light, which was at Brazil, and it was in qualifying, and qualifying began wet and dried over the course of the qualifying sessions, and was just at the right place at the right time on the right tyre, driving beautifully, and he took pole in his first season in Brazil in 2010. And he didn't just take pole, he took pole by a second. And bear in mind that behind him were Vettel, Webber, Hamilton, Alonso, and he was in a car that was not a top-running car, right? So, again, rookie season, not much expectation on him, but pulled a pole up out of nowhere in Brazil. Astonishing. However, unfortunately, Williams facing a lot of financial pressures, and even though he'd shown glimpses of something, he was actually booted out of Williams at the end of the season after finishing 14th and replaced by Maldonado, who brought a bunch of money with him, essentially. And so while he showed, like I say, huge potential in F1, he didn't have that financial backing at a team that really needed financial backing, right? And so he was, unfortunately, unceremoniously kicked out of Williams. But that wasn't the end, as we know, because in 2011, he joined Force India as a reserve driver, and so was still in Formula One, still a prodigious talent, clearly, and this set him up for a return to Formula One at Force India alongside Paul di Resta in 2012. And that was a pretty great season for him. Finished 5th in Valencia, 4th in Belgium, qualified 4th at his home race in Germany. And so already solid season, right? 2012, only his second season in Formula One as a driver, in a very, very solid but solidly midfield team. Then came Brazil again, 2 years after his pole position. Brazil 2012. And what do you know? Once again, it was a wet, dry situation. Now, he qualified really well, started in 6th. Now, as we know in Brazil, very, very unpredictable weather, often chucks it down, then blazing sunshine burns it all away, it's dry. It was all over the map. Now, Hülkenberg, it did rain, and Hülkenberg took a risk, stayed out alongside Jenson Button on slick tyres when everyone else came in. Jenson Button was in the lead at this point, but because of his superb wet weather driving, Hülkenberg caught Button and actually took the lead on lap 18. And they were just tentatively driving around, but were clearly faster than everyone else. It wasn't quite wet enough for the wet tyres or the intermediates that everyone else had put on. So much so that they actually pulled a minute on everyone else. They were a minute ahead of the rest of the field, having also not taken a pit stop, by the way. However, what could have been an extraordinary win was unfortunately not to be. Hülkenberg made a mistake, spun. Lewis Hamilton overtook him. Nico recovered and then started chasing back after Hamilton, started to attack him, tried to retake the lead, lost control, hit Hamilton. Hamilton retired, and Hülkenberg eventually finished 5th. Now, I will say that, to be fair, there was a safety car, and that 1 minute lead that Button and Hülkenberg had was completely wiped out. So had that safety car not happened, for whatever reason, I know we always theorise, hypothetically, what if, that would have been his first win, almost definitely, I would say. However, it was his double mistake that resulted in him not even getting a podium, let alone a win. But showed extraordinary performance in that race and judgment on the tyres, albeit with 2 silly mistakes. So his instability in teams continues in 2013. He moves to Sauber. Didn't have a great start. Things got a little better mid-season. And then by the second half of the season, really started to show his quality. In Monza, he qualified 3rd, ahead of both Ferraris at their home race, and eventually finished 5th. In Korea, he finished 4th and spent much of the closing stages defending his position from Hamilton and Alonso. And this sort of highlighted a skill that he has particularly, which is defending positions, making his car as wide as possible, and really highlighted that in Korea. He's very good at braking, he's very good at car placement, and he knows how to spoil someone else's race. Now, this is one of those turn left, turn right, what if moments in a career. In 2013, Michael Schumacher retired from the Mercedes operation. And as we know, they replaced Schumacher with Lewis Hamilton from McLaren. Now, later it was revealed that Mercedes had a backup plan. If they couldn't get Lewis from McLaren, they were going to sign Nico Hülkenberg. So it would have been Nico and the 2 Nicos, right? Nico Rosberg, Nico Hülkenberg. 2 German drivers racing for a German team would have been, crazy. But imagine what would have happened. Who knows what that Mercedes team would have been without Hamilton? We don't know. But that was potentially a huge turning point had Hamilton decided to stay with McLaren, which was the obvious choice at the time, right? To stay with McLaren. It was quite a risk, Lewis going to Mercedes. They looked good in qualifying, they looked fast, but they often faded in the race. And so it seemed like a big risk to go to Mercedes at the time. But anyway, it didn't seem like the logical choice for Hamilton, so it suggests that had Hamilton not made that kind of unexpected move, it was a slam dunk that Hülkenberg was going to go to Mercedes. If he did go to Mercedes, could we be looking at multiple world champion Nico Hülkenberg? He would have certainly taken the fight to Rosberg, for sure. So really, Nico has Lewis to quote-unquote thank for that. So he was only at Sauber in 2013 for a year. He didn't go to Mercedes. He did go back to Force India for 2014. And now he partnered actually in 2014 to 2016 at Force India with Sergio Perez. And this was one of the best, most equal pairings of that whole era, really. They were both really going at it. Hülkenberg probably faster in qualifying, and Perez probably better because of his time whispering abilities, probably slightly better in races. And this was the real differentiator, because although they were, if you just sort of looked at the results, it seemed quite uneven. If you looked at their performances, however, it was much more even. However, just on results, in the 3 seasons that they were together, Perez got podiums for Force India at Bahrain in 2014, Russia in 2015, Monaco in 2016, and Baku in 2016, when Hülkenberg didn't get any. As we know, his podium came much later. Happened last year. So, although Hülkenberg did look faster, often was the faster driver, Perez looked after his tyres, looked after his car, was more opportunistic, was a sort of smarter player in the race. So this was a bit of a knock to Hülkenberg. He became known as the guy that was fast but for some reason never quite there. However, in the middle of this stint, in 2015, he won Le Mans. He couldn't buy a podium in Formula One, but he won Le Mans in 2015 for the Porsche. And I remember this distinctly at the time, everyone in Formula One super happy because the guy who'd had such a glittering early and junior career was so unlucky in Formula One, missing out on podiums, and certainly obviously on the win as well, but finally got a bit of reward for his efforts, at least in Le Mans. At least. It's a huge, huge achievement to win Le Mans, don't get me wrong. But yeah, that was significant to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 2015. And I remember he came back reinvigorated, Didn't necessarily result in immediate podiums, certainly didn't. But I remember at the time, if you were watching Formula One, he came back sort of a reinvigorated character. So after a stint at Force India for 2017, he moves to Renault. Now, let's talk about the Baku race in 2017. Baku in Azerbaijan, and looked like he could be on the podium. It was an extraordinarily chaotic race. Cars ahead had collided, they'd retired for technical reasons, and potentially he was in a position for a podium. However, once again, a little bit of brain fade, he hit the wall, broke the car, and retired. And so this now became a bit of a monkey on his back by this point. So many podium opportunities, so much potential, so much speed, and yet something always goes wrong. And oftentimes it's an unforced error. But he was definitely the team leader at Renault. Starting off, he was partnered with Jolyon Palmer, absolutely dominated him in qualifying in the race. Then Carlos Sainz joined and was sort of a bit more even with Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz, clearly fantastic driver. However, in 2018, the following year, when he was partnered with Sainz, he outscored Carlos. Albeit Carlos' first year with the team, you've got to take that into consideration. Hülkenberg finished 7th with 69 points. Sainz only scored 53. And it was effectively the best of the rest, because ahead of him was Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull. They were all fighting in a whole different league. So he was definitely top of the midfield, ahead of Carlos Sainz. But again, no podiums. Now I should mention the little Kevin Magnussen blip. In 2017, going back a year, I should have mentioned it a second ago. They had a real fun on-track clash at Hungary in 2017, the first year he was with Renault. And this famously resulted in the media pen tête-à-tête when he sarcastically congratulated Magnussen as the most unsporting driver on the grid, to which Magnussen replied, quote, "Suck my balls, mate." Famous quote. I think we've all seen the video, right? Ironically, they would be paired together later and actually formed a great friendship, but I just thought that was a fun little side note there. So he's still with the Renault team in 2019, and it comes to his home race at Hockenheim. Another chaotic race, heavy rain, changeable conditions, and Nico, as he always is in the mixed up conditions, was excellent. And at one point he was second. However, things didn't quite work out. He ended up fourth, and as he got into the stadium section, overdrove it once again, lost the rear, crashed into the barrier, retired. He was in fourth, but he was looking super strong. He was catching up and could absolutely have been on the podium in 2019 at his home race. Would have been mega. But just pushed it that little bit far. It was his fault. No one else involved in the incident, and I'm sure was a tough pill to swallow for Nico Hülkenberg. So this is the year that Daniel Ricciardo joins him at Renault, and this is the first year that he truly has an extremely competitive partner who outperforms him, race to race and over the course of the season. So Ricciardo scored 54 points that season, Hülkenberg scored only 37. And so that was the final straw for Renault after these missed opportunities. And, he'd been with the team for a few years by this point. And at the end of the year, they had kicked him out and replaced him for Esteban Ocon. And he had nowhere to go, basically, for the 2020 season. Now, obviously, we know what happened in the 2020 season. COVID happened, and therefore it was completely disrupted. And so he was technically out of Formula One, but with random drivers potentially coming down with this COVID-19 randomly, he actually was the sort of stand-in or go-to stand-in driver. And so he raced for Racing Point when Perez tested positive for COVID. He had no preparation in that car whatsoever, did a decent qualifying, but the car had a problem before the start of the race, didn't even race. So that was hugely disappointing for him, being out of F1, albeit the stand-in. However, a week later, Perez was still unavailable. Hülkenberg qualified, and he qualified in third. And he hadn't done any pre-season prep. This was only his second weekend, still hadn't raced for them, and ended up finishing seventh after he had to do an extra stop, which was astonishing. Then, later in the season at the Nürburgring, Lance Stroll became ill, and so Racing Point needed Hülkenberg once again. So again, he came in very short notice, flew him in, started at the back, and finished in the points. An incredibly great position. So he solidified himself as a sort of super sub, right, to come in and replace a driver. So he stayed out of the sport, still wasn't getting hired, and in 2022, a couple of years later, Seb Vettel tested positive for COVID at the beginning of 2022, at the beginning of the season. So who do they call? You guessed it. Nico Hülkenberg was drafted in. And he did 2 races, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, didn't get any points, but again, zero prep, incredibly experienced, incredibly adaptable driver, kept himself fit and healthy. And so he became known as the paddock's third driver who could just come in and deliver. However, that wasn't to be his role in Formula One, because in 2023, he got the call up to Haas, replacing Mick Schumacher. So by this time, he's 35, he's been out of the sport for 3 years, and yet gets another opportunity. Huge, huge for Nico. And immediately he looked fast. He was faster than Magnussen, his teammate. They re-paired up again after that little contretemps in the media pen. But he was fast, and he was faster than Magnussen, who had been beating Schumacher. And in Canada, once again, wet conditions, qualified second. However, it was a shame because he received a grid penalty for failing to sufficiently slow under a red flag and ended up slipping back in the race anyway. The car wasn't actually competitive in race conditions, but proved his speed in qualifying, particularly in mixed conditions, once again. So great qualifying, not any particular standout results, but looked solid and was certainly a step up from the accident-prone Mick Schumacher, but was driving machinery that was heavily compromised, remember. 2024, the following year, was a much more standout performance. He absolutely destroyed Kevin Magnussen that season. He scored 41 points. Magnussen scored 16. He finished 11th in the Driver Championship, which is solid for a Haas at that time. And actually helped Haas finish 7th in the Constructors, which was their best result since 2018. And so, certainly against Magnussen, proved his value in Formula One. So now he's 37, bear in mind. And at this point you're thinking, okay, well, he's almost done it. He's been there. He's got so close. Then he was out of the sport for a few years. came back, had an okay season, had a pretty good season. Where does he go now? Well, thanks to Sauber, or more importantly, Audi, German manufacturer Audi, who is making a comeback into Formula One in 2026, in 2024, Audi/Sauber announced Nico is going to join them on a multi-year deal. So he finishes up the 2024 season and goes to Sauber in 2025 and is partnered alongside Gabriele Bortoleto on a multi-year deal. And they wanted a really impressive rookie, which they got in Gabriele Bortoleto, and an experienced head to help with this transition to a new team and a new power unit. And he really was a superb choice. I mean, given his experience, it's a great driver pairing. And I think they actually balance each other out very nicely. Gabriele has clearly got extraordinary speed, but he's getting the wisdom of his teammate, Nico Hülkenberg, and Nico Hülkenberg is compared against this young rookie who's got lots of ambition, and he really is holding his own, and, they're both doing spectacularly. So we're into the 2025 season. Sauber are surprisingly strong. They're doing pretty well. Gabriel's holding his own against Nico Hülkenberg, who is putting in probably better results, generally speaking. And then we get to the British Grand Prix. British Grand Prix 2025. Starts at the back row, 19th. Guess what? Wet, dry conditions. Hülkenberg is rubbing his hands together. This is his chance. However, we know how this usually ends, right? Lots of opportunity, a bit of luck, incredible skill, pace, great judgment, but it all falls away at the end and something happens. However, excellent first few laps. He makes the tyre changes at the right time, with the right conditions. He stayed on intermediates when he needed to. And he's in the right place at the restarts. Remember when Verstappen spins off down the back straight, Piastri gets penalised for that braking weird thing that he did when he was behind the safety car. All these things happen. But at the restart, he's on the right tyres, ready to attack. And so for the last part of the race, all eyes are on Hülkenberg, right? Everyone wants this first podium for Hülkenberg, having been in the Formula One for so long. And all he has to do is pass Stroll in the Aston Martin for third. He'd stuck on the slicks, he was ready to go. And after the safety car, it all happened, right? He went after Stroll, he took Stroll, but a Mr. Lewis Hamilton, a Sir Lewis Hamilton, is behind him at Silverstone in a Ferrari. And it's like, oh no, it's going to happen again. He's going to miss out on a podium. But remember, he's got the widest car in F1, not literally. And so astonishingly, he manages to hold off Lewis to get third, his first ever podium in Formula One in 2025 at the British Grand Prix. And honestly, I don't think anyone begrudged him that. I'm sure even Lewis, he was disappointed not to get onto the podium. But, after all of his success, I'm sure he could throw Nico a bone, right? And be happy for him. And so, after all that time, it was one of the most widely appreciated podiums, probably in Formula One history, that he gets his podium. And he's earned it, right? All of his experience, all of his unique skills led to this point. And bear in mind, this was his 239th start in Formula One. And he finishes third. Superb. And really 2025 kind of continued on in that vein. He ended up scoring in 9 rounds. He got 51 points, finished 11th in the championship. Gabriele Bortoleto scored 19, which is solid for a rookie. He made some silly errors, but, it's a rookie season. What are you going to do? However, Bortoleto, surprisingly, edged out Hülkenberg in qualifying. And Hülkenberg was always known as incredible qualifier. So, interesting. It really proves how competitive his teammate is and how good Bortoleto is to beat Hülkenberg in qualifying over a whole season in his rookie season. And we're going to talk about Bortoleto in a future episode. But I think this was almost like a Lennon-McCartney situation. They were both pushing each other in different ways. from different ends of the spectrum, right? And they ended up producing a fantastic result. So we move on to this year. And Audi now fully take over the team. They bring a brand new power unit. And it's been a bit of a mixed bag. To start off with, the car incredibly unreliable to start the season. Races where Hülkenberg was retiring on the formation lap, or lap to the grid, I think it was in, where was it? Miami, I want to say. He was doing a lap to the grid and the car didn't even make it round to the start-finish straight. He's been very unlucky, and this is why he's, down at the bottom of this list right now, with Bortoleto being up higher. Audi has 12 points in the Constructors' Championship. Bortoleto has scored 10 of them. Hülkenberg's only scored one time this season so far. However, like I say, he's been very unlucky with reliability. He's added 3 DNFs and that. Oh, it was Australia. That was right. It was Australia where he didn't even start. So, way back right at the beginning of the season. Don't know why. I think I'm visualizing the Miami track, and there's similarities, right? They look kind of similar. Anyway, qualifying slightly ahead in Nico Hülkenberg's favour, 6.5. But Bortoleto definitely has had the best Sundays so far. But it's looking a little rosier for Audi. Even with their unreliability, that car looks solid, right? It's solidly ahead of at least 3 teams, possibly 4. It's now consistently behind the Hasses. I would say Audi have been doing very well in qualifying. They were getting into Q3 a lot, but that has fallen away in recent times. One of the funniest things that happened this season to Hülkenberg was his retirement in Barcelona, and he was fighting for 9th at the time, so he would have got another couple of points. However, Liam Lawson ran through the gravel ahead of him, and a piece of gravel hit the random kill switch on the outside of the car, which turned his engine off. It basically shut down all the electrical in the power unit, which just shut off everything. Nothing worked anymore. Hülkenberg somehow managed to get back to the pits, but it couldn't be restarted. But the most bizarre retirement of the year, possibly of the last 10 years, goes to Nico Hülkenberg in Barcelona in 2026. So yeah, Nico Hülkenberg, very, very fast qualifier, incredible in mixed conditions, super good at defending a position, great under braking, very unlucky, made a lot of silly errors at the worst possible time to miss out on a lot more podiums and a lot more points than he could have gotten. Very technical. That's one thing he's not appreciated for, I believe. He has a lot of great feedback for the team, I've heard. Super adaptable. He proved that when he was the super sub in COVID, went on to win Le Mans at his first attempt. He's been in a whole bunch of teams, so he's got a whole load of experience of different cars, possibly one of the reasons why Audi wanted to bring him in as this transitional driver. Very good in low grip. And yeah, a real interesting driver in Formula One with a very interesting career. So that's Nico Hülkenberg. Let's see who we're going on to next. I think it was Ocon, right? Let's have a look. Next episode will be Esteban Ocon, French driver for the Haas team. Another driver with a very, very mixed, interesting history in Formula One. And will this season be his last? We'll talk about that in the next Driver Profile Series episode. Okay, that's all from me. See you next time. Bye-bye. I've been your host, Jamie Muffett. You can find me on social media for more of this rambling nonsense under my name or F1_Jamie. This is an RPS audio production.